His brother gave the Turks a name. He gave them a world. When Bumin Khagan died in 552, the empire he had just founded barely existed. A new flag, a name carved into history, Turk. But a name is not yet a power, and the steppe is not patient with the weak. Around that fragile new kingdom waited older empires. Sasanian Persia in the south, the kingdoms of China behind their walls, the Hephthalites, the so-called White Huns, masters of Central Asia and terror of the Silk Road. And far in the west, Byzantium, ruling from the golden city of Constantinople, all of them stronger, all of them richer, all of them older. Against them stood one man, a brother, a Western ruler, a prince who was not the founder, but who would carry the Turk name farther than anyone before him. In just over 20 years, he would help destroy an empire that had defied Persia for a century. He would seize the greatest trade road on earth. He would send envoys 5,000 kilometers to the throne of the Roman emperor, and he would help stretch the Turk world from the forests of Manchuria to the shores of the Black Sea. His name was Istemi, and this is the story of how he built the world his brother only named.
Most people remember the founder, the first king, the one who plants the flag. But empires are not built just founder. They are built by the second man, the one who walks after the victory and asks, "What now?" For the Turks, that man was Istemi.
The early Turk state was not centralized like the kingdoms of Europe. Power was divided between a senior Khagan in the east, Mongolia, the Altai, the Old Heartland, and a powerful Western ruler who held the road towards Central Asia, Persia, and Rome. That Western ruler was Istemi. His political title was Yabghu, ruler of the Western Wing. Later Turkic memory, including the Orkhan tradition, would remember him among the great founding rulers. After Bumin's death, the empire took shape around two wings, the Eastern Heartland under the senior Khagans, Bumin's sons and grandsons, and the Western frontier under Istemi, the Yabghu of the West. On paper, the junior partner. In reality, the man given the harder, wider, more dangerous half of the world. Because everything that mattered to the future of the empire, the trade roads, the rich oasis cities, the contact with Persia and Byzantium, all of it lay in the west. Bumin ruled the cradle of the Turk people. Istemi ruled the future.
Think of it like this. Bumin was given the homeland. Istemi was given the horizon. And the horizon in the 6th century was the Silk Road, the richest piece of land on earth.
But to touch the Silk Road, Istemi had to face the empire that owned it, the Hephthalites, the White Huns. A century earlier, they had ridden out of the steppe and built one of the most feared empires in Asia. They had broken the armies of Sasanian Persia. They had killed a Persian shah on the battlefield, Peroz I, and forced his successors to pay tribute. They controlled the great trading cities of Central Asia. At their peak, they were untouchable. But by the 550s, two new powers were rising on either side of them. In the east, the Turks, hungry and disciplined. In the south, Sasanian Persia, under one of the greatest shahs in its history, Khosrow I, Khosrow Anushirvan, of the immortal soul. A king who had spent decades rebuilding his army. He had not forgotten that the Hephthalites once killed his grandfather. Two empires, one enemy between them, and both ready to move.
When two strong neighbors share one rich enemy, that enemy is already finished. They just don't know it yet. Istemi understood that before anyone else.
Istemi did not strike first. He sent envoys south, quiet messengers into the courts of Persia. The proposal was simple, a marriage alliance. Istemi's own daughter would be given to Shah Khosrow, and a war alliance, Turks from the north, Persians from the south. The Hephthalites caught between two hammers. Khosrow understood immediately. The deal was sealed, and the Shah became Istemi's son-in-law. Around 558, the trap began to close. Tumens of Turk horse archers poured south. The Persian army marched up into Khorasan. The Hephthalites were caught, cornered, surrounded. By the early 560s, their armies were shattered, their king dead, their cities falling one by one. An empire that had terrified Persia for 100 years disappeared from the map. On its grave, Istemi and Khosrow drew a new border. North of the Oxus River, the great Amu Darya became Turk. South of it, Persian. In a single agreement, Istemi had done what no Turk before him had ever done. He had placed his empire on the map of the civilized world as an equal of Persia.
Stop and think. A people that were around called blacksmith slaves only 13 years earlier are now sitting at the table with the Shah of Persia, drawing borders. That is the speed of Istemi.
But Istemi had not fought a war just to share a border. He had fought it for what lay between those borders. The Silk Road, the single richest network of trade on Earth. Caravans crossing from China to the Mediterranean, carrying silk, jade, glass, gold, paper, secrets. Whoever controlled the middle controlled the wealth of half the world. And the middle now belonged to Istemi. The old Sogdian and Hephthalite cities, Bukhara, Samarkand, Chach, became the economic heart of Turk power. The Turks had the swords. The Sogdians, a brilliant Iranian-speaking merchant people, had the markets, the languages, the roots. Istemi was wise enough to see this. He did not destroy them, he used them. He made the Sogdians his diplomats, his scribes, his trade negotiators. He let them grow rich as long as he grew richer. In a few short years, the Turkic Khaganate became one of the wealthiest states in the world, not by farming, not by mining, by owning the road.
Empires don't just conquer land, they conquer flow. The flow of goods, of money, of information. Istemi learned how to charge the toll on civilization itself.
But controlling the road meant nothing if no one would buy what came down it. And here, Istemi ran into a wall named Khosrow, his own ally, his own son-in-law. The problem was silk. Chinese silk now flowed in massive quantities through Turk-held cities. Istemi needed buyers. The richest buyer in the west was Byzantium. The most direct road to Byzantium ran straight through Persia. So Istemi sent a trade caravan south, led by a trusted Sogdian merchant named Maniak. According to the Byzantine historian Menander Protector, Khosrow bought the silk and then burned it in front of the Sogdian envoys as a message. Persia would not become a customer of the Turks. The same source records that a second embassy ended with several envoys poisoned on the road home. The alliance was over. Istemi and Khosrow, once bound by marriage, were now rivals, and Istemi faced a question no Turk had ever faced before. If the road west was blocked by Persia, could he go around it?
This is the moment everything changes. A steppe ruler looks at a map and asks, is there another way to Rome? That single question is about to redraw the world.
Maniak came before Istemi with an idea, a dangerous idea. If Persia would not let them pass, they would go above Persia, north of the Caspian, north of the Caucasus, across thousands of kilometers of unknown lands, all the way to Constantinople, directly. No documented Turk mission to Byzantium had ever attempted such a journey. Istemi agreed. In the year 568, the first documented Turk embassy to Byzantium rode west, Maniak at its head, carrying letters in Sogdian. They reached Constantinople, marble walls, golden domes, the court of Emperor Justin II. And there, the envoy of Istemi Yabghu, a man whose people had been called slaves a generation ago, delivered a letter from his master, a letter from one empire to another, proposing two things: a direct silk route bypassing Persia and a military alliance against the Sasanian Shah. Justin II accepted. In August 569, he sent his own embassy back, led by a Byzantine officer named Zamarchus. Zamarchus made the long journey east, all the way to Istemi's camp in the Tian Shan Mountains. He saw the gold, the silk, the thrones, the warriors, a court that did not feel like a tribe, it felt like an empire. The story of his journey was preserved by Menander Protector, and through that account we still glimpse Istemi today, seated among his warriors, drinking from cups of gold, receiving foreign envoys with calm authority. For years afterward, embassies traveled back and forth between Constantinople and the Turk steppe. A steppe people, one generation out of vassalage, had just joined the global stage, not as raiders, as a recognized empire in formal diplomatic relations with Rome itself.
Most empires take centuries to be acknowledged by the great power. The Turks did it in 17 years. That is not luck, that is Istemi.
While envoys rode west, Istemi's armies rode in every other direction. The Turk Khaganate expanded faster than any empire of its age, north into the forests, south into the oasis kingdoms of the Tarim Basin, west into the Caucasus and the northern shores of the Caspian. To the Turks, the Avars were not mysterious conquerors. They were remembered as fugitives, people who had fled west before the pressure of Turk power. The Avars, who later appeared in Europe, were remembered in Turk and Byzantine diplomacy as runaways from the rising Göktürk world. By the early 570s, the Turk Khaganate was no longer a regional power. From end to end, Manchuria to the Caucasus, more than 6 million square kilometers, one of the largest empires the world had ever seen. Built in a single generation by two brothers, one of whom was already dead. The grand anti-Persian alliance with Byzantium never became the clean two-front victory Istemi had imagined. Byzantium had its own interests. It accepted Avar refugees, the same Avars Istemi was hunting, and made separate peace with Persia when it suited her. The alliance cracked. The vision of two empires crushing Persia together never fully delivered. Istemi had reached the limits of what one man could hold together. But the empire he had built was no longer dependent on him. It had momentum, it had wealth, it had structure. It would continue, with him or without him.
This is the part of every great life no one wants to talk about. The part where the world becomes too large for one man. Istemi didn't fall here. He simply ran out of time.
Around the year 575, Istemi died. He had ruled the western half of the Turk Khaganate for more than 20 years. He had outlived his brother by more than 2 decades. His son, Tardu, inherited the western throne, but the empire he built was too vast for one family to hold forever. After the death of the eastern Khagan, Taspar, in 581, succession struggles tore at the empire. By 603, the once unified Turk Khaganate had formally split into the eastern and western Khaganates. And yet, even after the split, the structures Istemi created lasted. The trade networks he opened lasted. The borders he drew with Persia lasted, in places, for a century. The cities he placed under Turk rule, Bukhara, Samarkand, Chach, became the heart of Central Asian civilization. He did not just build an empire, he built the shape of a region, a shape that would outlive every empire that came after. Nearly 2 centuries later, when the Turks finally wrote down their own history, in their own script, in their own language, carved into stone on the Orkhon River, they did not name only one founder, they named 2, Bumin Khagan and Istemi Khagan, side by side. The men who carved those stones knew something. They knew the Turk people had not been born from a single act. They had been born from a pair. One brother who named them, one brother who placed them on the map of the world. No Roman emperor carved Istemi's name in stone. No Persian shah remembered him with awe. The Turks did, because the Turks remembered who broke the Hephthalites, who sent the embassy to Constantinople, who turned the Silk Road into a Turk road. And every Turkic state that came after, across more than 1,000 years, owed something, in some quiet corner of its history, to him.
We remember the man who planted the flag. We forget the man who held the line. Istemi held the line across an entire continent, and he held it long enough to make the line permanent. From the Altai Mountains to the throne of the Roman Emperor, from a brother in the shadow to a name carved beside the founder, that is Istemi. If the story moved you, subscribe. There is more of this history we were never told.